There comes a moment in a man's life when he realizes that explaining himself no longer brings clarity, it only drains him. He notices that every sentence he offers feels like a defense, every justification like a quiet surrender, not because he lacks words, but because the world stopped listening a long time ago. And in that moment, silence stops feeling like weakness and starts feeling like truth. Older men stop explaining themselves because they've learned, often painfully, that understanding cannot be forced. In youth, you believe that if you just say it better, more carefully, more patiently, people will finally see you. Age teaches a harsher lesson most people don't want to understand. They want to be affirmed. So the older man withdraws his explanations, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. He saves his energy for what still matters. They stop explaining because they've watched their words be used against them, vulnerability misunderstood, honesty reinterpreted as guilt over time. A man learns that silence protects what remains of his inner life. Not everyone deserves access to your reasons, your struggles, your private conclusions. Silence becomes a boundary, not a wall. They stop explaining because they've made peace with being misunderstood. This is one of the hardest psychological transitions of aging, letting go of the need to be seen as good, reasonable, or right. When you no longer need external validation to confirm your worth, explanations become unnecessary. You begin to live by internal alignment instead of external approval. They stop explaining because life has already tested them enough. Loss, failure, sacrifice, responsibility, these things shape a man more deeply than opinions ever could. An older man doesn't argue his values, he embodies them. His actions speak quietly, consistently, without performance, and those who are meant to understand will recognize him without words. They stop explaining because time becomes sacred. Every conversation has a cost. Every argument takes something you won't get back. With age comes the brutal clarity that peace is more valuable than being right, and dignity more important than being heard. Silence is not withdrawal from life, it is selective engagement with it. If you are an older man learning to speak less, don't confuse that with giving up. You are not shrinking, you are refining. Let your silence be intentional, not resentful. Let it come from strength, not exhaustion. Speak when it serves truth, not ego. Stand firm in who you are, even if no one asks you to explain. Because the deepest form of self-respect is living honestly, whether the world understands you or not. Silence for an older man is rarely an accident. It is not the absence of thought or the inability to speak. It is a conscious decision shaped by years of being misunderstood, interrupted, or judged before the sentence was finished. When a man has spent decades explaining his intentions, defending his character, and justifying his choices, he eventually learns that not every truth needs an audience. Silence becomes a way of standing upright without asking for permission. In youth, silence is often confused with fear. But with age, silence is born from clarity. An older man understands that self-respect begins where self-betrayal ends. Explaining too much is often a form of self-betrayal, a subtle way of asking others to approve your existence. Over time, he realizes that dignity does not require constant explanation. What matters is whether his actions align with his values, not whether others interpret them correctly. There is also protection in silence. Words once spoken can be twisted, stored, and later used as weapons. An older man has seen this happen enough times to know that restraint is not cowardice. Silence preserves the inner life, the private space where meaning is formed and pain is processed. By choosing not to explain, he guards what is left of his emotional energy, directing it toward reflection rather than defense. Silence is also a declaration of independence. It signals that a man no longer measures himself through the reactions of others. He stops negotiating his worth through conversations that lead nowhere. Instead, he allows his presence, his consistency, and his behavior to speak in ways explanations never could. When silence comes from self-respect, it is calm, not bitter. It does not seek to punish or withdraw from the world. It simply refuses to beg for understanding. In that refusal, an older man finds a quiet strength, a groundedness that does not rise or fall with opinion. He becomes comfortable standing alone in his truth, knowing that not being understood is sometimes the price of remaining whole. Letting go of the need to be understood is one of the most difficult psychological shifts a man makes as he grows older. For much of life, understanding feels essential, almost like oxygen. You explain yourself because you believe that if others truly grasp your intentions, your struggles, or your reasoning, conflict will dissolve and connection will follow. Age teaches a quieter, harsher lesson. Being understood is not guaranteed, and chasing it can slowly erode your sense of self. An older man begins to see that the need to be understood often hides a deeper dependency. It ties his inner stability to external reactions. When people agree with him, he feels justified. When they don't, he feels questioned, diminished, or invisible. Over time, this emotional bargaining becomes exhausting. He realizes that constantly clarifying himself is not communication, it is negotiation, and his identity should not be something up for debate. There is also grief in this letting go. To release the need to be understood means accepting that some people will never see you clearly, no matter how patiently you speak. Family members may reduce your complexity to a role. Society may dismiss your experience as outdated. Friends may hear your words but filter them through their own expectations. Accepting this truth hurts, but resisting it hurts more. As the need to be understood loosens its grip, something unexpected happens. A man's attention turns inward. He starts measuring his life by internal coherence rather than external approval. He asks whether his actions align with his conscience, not whether they are applauded. This internal alignment brings a steadiness that explanations never provided. Letting go does not mean becoming cold or detached. It means choosing where to invest emotional effort. An older man learns to speak when there is genuine openness and to remain silent when there is none. In doing so, he reclaims his time, his energy, and his sense of dignity. He becomes less reactive, less defensive, and more grounded in who he is, even when misunderstood. Protecting the inner life becomes a priority when a man realizes how easily it can be invaded. Over the years, he has learned that not every question is asked with care, and not every listener is safe. Some listen only to respond, others to judge, and some to collect information they will later use without mercy. With age comes the awareness that openness without boundaries is not honesty, it is exposure. An older man understands that his inner world is the result of years of reflection, pain, sacrifice, and hard-earned understanding. It is fragile not because it is weak, but because it is valuable. Boundaries form when he decides that access to his thoughts and emotions must be earned, not demanded. Silence becomes the gatekeeper, allowing him to choose when and with whom he shares what matters. This protection is not about secrecy or manipulation. It is about discernment. He no longer feels obligated to explain his feelings to people who lack the capacity to hold them with respect. By withholding words, he prevents unnecessary conflict and preserves emotional clarity. Boundaries help him stay anchored in his own perspective, instead of being pulled into endless explanations that dilute his truth. As these boundaries strengthen, his inner life grows calmer. There is less noise, less self-doubt, and less pressure to perform. He begins to trust his own judgment without seeking constant reassurance. In protecting his inner life, he creates space for meaning, reflection, and quiet strength. Silence in this sense is not emptiness but containment, a deliberate choice to keep what is sacred intact. Living values instead of explaining them is a shift from words to embodiment. An older man understands that principles lose their power when they are constantly argued or defended. He no longer tries to convince others of what he believes. He simply lives in a way that reflects it. His discipline, restraint, and consistency become the message. People may disagree with his choices, but they cannot deny the quiet authority of a life aligned with its own code. Over time, he learns that explanations invite debate, but actions reveal character. When values are lived rather than spoken, they stand without needing approval or applause. Choosing peace over validation becomes a conscious practice as a man grows older. For decades, he may have sought approval, repeating himself to be heard, explaining choices to justify his existence, and measuring his worth by the reactions of others. Over time, he discovers that this pursuit is exhausting and often futile. People will misunderstand, misjudge, or simply fail to notice, no matter how eloquently he explains. The cost of constant validation is high, and the return is rarely satisfying. An older man begins to understand that true peace does not come from being understood. It comes from being aligned with his own principles. He learns to distinguish between battles worth engaging and arguments better left unspoken. Choosing peace means letting go of the need for external affirmation and redirecting energy towards self, coherence, and quiet integrity. This shift also transforms relationships. When he no longer demands validation, interactions become more authentic. Others sense his steadiness, and respect is given without being requested. He no longer reacts impulsively to criticism or disagreement because his sense of worth is internal, not borrowed from external recognition. In embracing peace over validation, he cultivates resilience. He can stand firm in his truth without agitation, knowing that calmness and self-respect outweigh the fleeting satisfaction of being acknowledged or approved.